Okay, I'm in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. In the previous message, I was talking about the three different groups of people where you've got the Gentiles, the Jews, and the people of the New Covenant. These are the groups of people that Paul is referring to when he talks about things in this letter. In the previous message, I was in verse 18. In this one, I'm going to move into verse 19. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 19, he says, "For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent." Okay, that is what is written. Okay, let me go back up into verse 18 and say that again, blend it in with verse 18. "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent." All right, so I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about the wisdom of the wise. In the previous message, I got into some generalities. In this one, I'm going to get a little bit more specific. All right, now to do this, the wisdom of the wise, this is going to come from two out of the three different groups of people. Okay, it's not going to come out of the people who are those who believe in the new covenant. All right, now, of course, those who believe in the new covenant have got, they've got a long ways to go. And so the wisdom that they usually start with is something that has to be corrected. But I will call that residue from being a Gentile or from being a Jew. I often will tell people whenever I hold to something that would not necessarily be close to the new covenant for some reason, and this of course is a really fuzzy area. But I know these things, and I will tell people sometimes that this specific thing that's going on in my mind is still a little bit of Pharisaical residue. Okay, just to give you an example, even from me. All right. So either way, it goes back to the other two groups. You've got the two groups of people who are going to be considered to be the wise that God is going to bring to nothing. Okay, that their wisdom is going to be brought to nothing, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. Let's start with the wisdom of the Gentiles, and then I'll move to the wisdom of the Jews. Okay, now the wisdom of the Gentiles was well codified, it was well described during the time of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Okay, that's when it was well codified, it was well documented. Now, I don't think that it started with them at all. I think that the reason why they had a degree of popularity was simply because there were a lot of people who already believed the stuff that they kind of organized reasonably well and documented well. That the only reason why this became popular was because it was already popular in the minds of people. Okay, so where would this come from? Well, this generally comes from people having conversations with each other, thinking about some complex questions. All right, and what I like to call this is campfire theology. Okay, campfire theology. This is the kind of theology that gets developed when you have a group of guys or gals, or just people surrounding a campfire. Right, they're sitting around the campfire, and somebody pops the question, well, if there was a God, what would he be like? Okay, just something as simple as that. Okay, if there was a God, then what would he be like? And this question, I'm sure, was asked throughout the entire history of humanity. All right, ever since the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve were kicked out of there, it shouldn't have been too long before some people would be asking the question, well, if there is a God, what would he be like? Because they clearly didn't have any connection with him. But if they saw that there was enough evidence to suggest that he does exist, then, okay, well, who is he? So you've got these people who are going to have some discussions and maybe some debates about who God would be if there was a God. Or if there is a God, then who is he? What's he like? What does it mean for him to be God? They can easily start with something as simple as, well, he's definitely not going to be like us, and so whatever we're like, we could think about the opposite, of what would represent better perfection of some kind. That's a good start. That's where people will start when it comes to these kinds of things. But you need to keep in mind, and this is what most people do not want to consider, but I think it's important to consider this, to keep this in mind, that these discussions are taking place with people who don't know God, right? They do not have all knowledge of the universe, okay? And so because they do not know God and they do not have all of the knowledge of the universe, wouldn't you expect that some of their conclusions would be flawed? Or do you think that there's somebody who doesn't know anything and definitely does not know who God is, you really think that they're going to come to an absolute conclusion of who he really is and what he's about? This is Greek philosophy, right? Pagan Greek philosophy. The idea of pagan Greek philosophy is that you can determine these things through reason, okay? Through reason and logical thinking, that you can eventually come to the correct conclusions. And, maybe you can come to a few. I certainly can't say that it will never happen, but the probability of being 100% correct is really small, okay? Very small, to the extent where I don't think it's possible. So, the campfire theology is something that's been going on throughout the entire history of humanity, and it still goes on today, all right? But this was a milestone in it during the days of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. This was a real milestone because this is when it was pretty well documented and codified. Okay, now today, if you consider the modern age today, which is filled with a lot of people, and the overwhelming majority of them have never studied Greek philosophy, pagan Greek philosophy. They've never done that. But they can get around their little campfires and they can do the exact same thing, and chances are they're going to come out with the same kinds of conclusions that are found in that milestone era of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They'll probably agree with those things. And so if you find someone who is willing to study the works of Aristotle, for example, which was the third generation, you have Socrates and then Plato after him, and then Aristotle really refined everything from there. If someone will read the works of Aristotle, they'll find a lot of things that they agree with. And why is that? Because they've already thought about these things. They're going to look at his letters, his books, just as they look at anybody and anything, and evaluate things like that according to what they already think. Because of course, everything they think is 100% correct, and so everything outside of them has to be evaluated according to what they think, all right? And they'll find that there are a lot of things that they agree with. Just because, like I said, it's just normal for a person to wrestle with these issues, even if they don't have conversations with other people, even if they never get around the campfire, they're still going to do it by themselves, okay? But this was a very important milestone in history, and this was the real time when this was well documented. And so I will refer to it often just because of that. But it doesn't mean that it started there. I don't think it started there at all. So the wisdom of the Gentiles comes from that history, in effect. Okay, it's from that history that the wisdom of the Gentiles is during the time when Paul was writing this letter, and I could say it still goes on today, it's still the same thing, that when they had schools, theological schools or educational schools or lectures and stuff like that, it was about this. This is what these topics were about, that people were talking about, when they had some free time off of work and when they were hanging out among themselves. And God is going to bring this to nothing, all right, in comparison with what he thinks and what he sees, especially about himself. He's going to bring this to nothing. What are some of the key points about pagan Greek philosophy, especially when it comes to defining who God is? All right. Well, again, he's not going to be like us. So there will be some qualities that they can define just from that. We can start with the fact that he may know everything. Well, he's going to have to know everything if he's going to be God. And if he doesn't know everything, well, then that would be outside of the definition of God. Okay, this is the way they think. All right, and I can understand where a person would consider that, and I have some things to say about it that I'll come back to in a little bit. But if he knows everything, then there are some implications to that. There are going to be some consequences and side effects to that. What else would they perhaps decide? They would decide that he has control over everything. If he doesn't have control over everything, well, then he's not God, because what kind of a God would not have total and absolute control over every molecule in the universe? Okay, there cannot be a maverick molecule in the universe. That's how it's often described in theological circles today. So he has to know everything. He has to be in control of everything. And of course, there are a lot of things that follow up from that. Things like he definitely has the plan for your life. Not a plan. He's got the plan, and there is nothing that's going to happen in your life outside of his design. Okay? Now, just those three items themselves, if you put those three together, what you've got is you've got a God who is not really relational. Okay, and this requires a lot of thought and consideration. Okay, I didn't just say this off the top of my head. I have a lot of reasons why I would say that, and I wouldn't expect a lot of people to agree with me right away. But instead, I'm going to encourage you to really think about that. Think about that statement, that the idea that God is not relational. If he knows everything, if he's in control of everything, and he's got the plan, then there is no relational experience with that kind of a person. By default, this God that gets defined becomes similar to a God of stone. Okay? That's what happens. You have a God of stone, one that cannot be related to. There's no relational things going on. It's just all about he knows everything, he's in control of everything, and he's got the plan. Well, what is there to talk about? What are you going to do? How are you going to talk with God? The one who knows everything. What are you going to say? Are you ever going to engage in some form of prayer and say something to the effect of, God, I'm just not sure if you're aware of this, but maybe this is something you ought to consider or be aware of. You should know. All right, what am I suggesting by that? I'm suggesting that God may not know everything. And the reason why I say that is not to say that he can't know everything. I'm sure that he knows everything that he wants to know. And I'm also suggesting that there are some things he would just rather not know. Okay? The classic example. What about Abraham and Sodom and Gomorrah? What was God doing there, investigating what people were praying to him about? What was he doing there? Why would he even go? Wouldn't he know? He didn't want to know what was going on over there. Even, after the conversation with Abraham, he didn't go. He sent his angels. He said, you go see what's going on. I'll just wait here. Okay? So was he in control of everything that was going on over there? Did he know everything that was going on over there? Was it his plan that this is what was going to be going on over there? Okay? take that into consideration and think about it. All right? It's important to see that what they come up with is they come up with a God of stone who is not relational. All right? They just don't call it that, but that is in effect what you end up with. Okay? So this is pagan Greek philosophy and the wisdom of the Gentiles. This is the best that they've been able to come up with ever since. Okay, now then you got the wisdom of the Jews. Okay, what this generally means is the law, the Mosaic law. That is the wisdom of the Jews, which defines a relational God. So they do have an advantage if they are devoted to the Mosaic law. They have an advantage over the Gentiles because at least they can see that God is relational. You know, he says, this is what I am going to do, and if you do this, this is what I am going to do. This is what you are going to do. If you decide to do this, then, you know, it's all about willful, voluntary behavior. There's no control. There's no plan. Okay, I do believe that God makes plans, and he has a plan, you know, for some people to be involved in. What I have been doing in the ministry, I genuinely believe is a plan of God, and I've responded to that. So I'm not going to say that there's never any plan, you know, that's not the case. If I do that, then it's just as bad as saying that he has every plan. It's the same. It's just in the opposite direction. No, I believe in a relational God, a God with whom we can have a personal relationship with. So that the Jews could see that a little bit. But the problem with the law is that the law itself does not define a relationship that's going to be successful. Okay, the relationship is, if you obey, I will bless your flesh, and if you don't, then I won't. Okay, so it's not going to work out. There is nothing in the law that says that if you will obey the law, you will know your God. That is not there. That's not why he gave the law. And so the wisdom of the Jews does not include knowing God. That it's not going to include that. Okay, now they may be correct on a few things, you know, but it's the same thing. They've got their own campfire theology. It's just usually done around a table, not a campfire. But you know, it's the same thing where they have discussions and debates. You know, usually this is done just amongst the rabbis and their pupils, their students. And I've seen a lot of this. You know, before I became a Christian, this was what I was doing. So I know it. You know, maybe you've seen it in the movies or something. There's a few movies that show this kind of behavior, this kind of these discussions and stuff. But the wisdom of the Jews is highly limited in the sense that they still will not know the Lord. Okay, what they're hanging on to is the law. Okay, so in terms of foolishness, okay, the reason why the Gentiles will see the truth of the new covenant and what he has presented there as being foolishness is because it's stuff that just is not consistent with what they already believe. And with the Jews, the real problem with the wisdom of the Jews is forgiveness. It's the cross. That's the real issue, because when Jesus died for the sins of the world, he effectively fulfilled the demands of the law. That's going to be foolishness to the Jew. Okay, so also from God's point of view, he's going to see them being the ones who are foolish. All right, so who's foolish? It just depends on who you ask. You know, if you ask the Lord, he's got an opinion on this subject. He really does. He's not just some God of stone, you know. He's really got some thoughts about this. And I'm sure that, you know, if you genuinely want to know what he thinks, he'll probably share that with you. Okay, so what happened after the cross? You know, how did this campfire theology kind of continue? How was it perpetuated? Well, it definitely started with the early church fathers, the generation right after the apostles. The early church fathers did their documentation because they now got this new thing called the Bible. All right, they got this new thing. They got the letters of Paul, and they got the Old Testament, and the letter that James wrote, and the letters that John wrote. They've got a lot to work with now. And so the philosophers, the religious people, the educated people, the people who want to be Christians, and even those who don't care about it at all necessarily, all right, they're going to have some discussions. I mean, the discussions are going to continue. They're going to have some discussions about the things of God. Okay, and this is what happened. Most of these people, the overwhelming majority, were Gentiles. And so they imposed the Gentile wisdom onto the scriptures. Okay, this is what happened. They studied the scriptures from the perspective of pagan Greek philosophy. All right, that's what happened. So things got started, okay, in a dysfunctional way, and the relational God was effectively lost right from the beginning, for most. Okay, and this is not a big deal because, as you can tell, there are very few people who know the Lord in every generation. At least the Lord gets some. That's, is better than none. But definitely the overwhelming majority will never get close enough to be able to suggest that they know the Lord. This went on for a long time, and then we had Augustine. Okay, and Augustine, if you check any encyclopedia on Augustine, okay, it will tell you that he was without question the most influential theologian in Christianity. Okay, which is generally referring to Catholicism, which is something different. But Augustine was considered to be the most influential theologian within Catholicism at that time, and then later he became the most influential theologian in Protestantism, but it wasn't through him, it was through somebody else. All right, so it was Augustine who became highly influential because what he said was popular. There were a lot of people who believed what he had to say. And why? Because they already believed what he had to say. Okay, that's how people are. They got their own ideas that they've developed from their campfire theology. And if they can find somebody who says what they agree with, well, then that person is influential. Okay, that's how it works. It's not complicated. Okay, and Augustine, and you should check the encyclopedias, okay? And you will see the articles are very open. They're very direct. That Augustine taught the Bible through the lens of pagan Greek philosophy. He interpreted the Bible according to pagan Greek philosophy. Okay, it's right there. Okay, I've looked, I've read, I've seen. You do it. You don't have to believe me. You can just go read it for yourself, and you'll see that this is true. Okay, now if I was to say, now folks, I just want you to know that everything that I teach is stuff that I learned from pagan Greek philosophy that I'm teaching through the scriptures. Okay, if I said that, then hopefully you would say something like, okay, Aaron, that sounds nice, but let us know when you make a correction to that. Okay, you might say some other things, but that would perhaps be a polite way to approach the topic. Okay, if I was teaching from the perspective of the Jews, the wisdom of the law, I could say something like, okay, folks, now listen, you cannot be a Christian, okay, until you first convert to Judaism through circumcision and baptism. Okay, now if I said that through the wisdom of the Jews, I would hope that you would, recognize that I probably need to mature a little bit more in my faith. All right, I would hope that you would see that. Okay, but this is what happened. This is what's been going on. So you have Augustine, who's considered to be the most influential Christian theologian in history, and this is why, because he interprets the Bible according to pagan Greek philosophy. Okay, well that didn't go very well with the Protestant Reformation, or I prefer to call it the Protestant Reformation, because they were protesting. Now, of course, it didn't take long before they forgot what they were protesting. That's when they became Protestants, okay? Because it effectively negated most of what Luther was figuring out through various things, and this is not the place to talk about that. What I need to mention is that they would not accept Augustine because he's Catholic, all right? And the Catholics, adore him. He's their guy, so they can't have him. So they got somebody else. They got Calvin. All right, that's who they got. They got Calvin. And what did Calvin say in his writings? Well, maybe you haven't read them. That's fine. I have. I've read them. I will tell you. He said that everything that he believed and everything that he taught was consistent with Augustine. All right? Everything. 100%. That, everything that Augustine said, he agreed with. So he was the representative of pagan Greek philosophy to the Protestant world. Okay? And ever since, that's been the predominant view in the Christian church. And if they don't take all the points of Calvinism, they take, maybe 2 out of 5, or 1 out of 5 kind of thing. Very few will dump it 100%. And, maybe there are some things in there. Like I said, by accident, people can come up with the truth. Okay? But that's the history. Okay? That's the history. And so the wisdom of the Gentiles has survived throughout the history of the church. And the wisdom of the Jews is just kind of sprung up in little pockets here and there, but hasn't been quite that influential. Definitely, pagan Greek philosophy has been a part of the church ever since, and it will always be that way. But those are the two directions that people go in. It's either through Catholicism with Augustine, or it's through Calvin in Protestantism. Doesn't matter which one you pick. You're still going to end up with a God of stone. You're still going to end up with a God who is not relational, no matter which option you want to take. And so that's what I want you to see about the two different groups, the Jews and the Gentiles, and how they differ from the third group, the New Covenant believers. And again, the New Covenant believers have got to let go of a lot of this wisdom, that they brought in with them to their new faith. But at least they have a chance at working through those things. Okay, let me check my notes here briefly. So some examples on where this tends to go. Just to give you some examples. Where this goes is that people usually start with the idea that God cannot. Okay? Now, I can't bear the thought of suggesting that God cannot do something. To me, that just doesn't make any sense at all. But people will take a position, God cannot, because if he did, then he wouldn't be God. All right? And to give you a good example, people will say things like, well, God cannot be unloving. All right? He can't do that. He can't be unloving. So what do they do from there? They have to define what it means to be loving. And one of the things that shows up is that people will say that if he sends someone to hell, then that is not loving. Okay? And so they will go through all kinds of theological gymnastics in order to search the scriptures till they find the ones that will justify their beliefs, where they will come to the conclusion that God will not send anyone to hell, at least in the way that I think is clearly described by Jesus. Instead, some people will go so far as to redefine hell and say that hell is being in the presence of God when you don't want to be. All right, just to give you an exaggerated example, if you believe that, well, all I can say is God bless you, and I hope that works out for you. But I think that this is going to have some consequences in your beliefs that you're not going to like eventually. This is an example where people will end up with something called universal salvation. Okay, now let's take another example of something that God cannot do. Okay, God cannot relate to people according to the old covenant. All right, now I think he can, especially if they have not embraced the new covenant. Well, then what's he got left, right? And that seems to be well described when he says things like people are going to be evaluated by their works. When they go before God and they're evaluated by their works, that's because there's no alternative. They're not going. They didn't embrace the new covenant, and so there's nothing left. And they're going to ask for it. Okay, they're going to ask for it. They're going to say, "But God, look what I did. Look what I didn't do." Okay, that's all a system of works that's going to be evaluated by the old covenant, by the law. And people want to believe, some people want to believe that God will not relate to people on the basis of the old covenant. Okay, now what follows up with that usually is that all prophecy has been fulfilled. Okay, that's usually the follow-up to that. And then what happens is that people get into something called preterism, okay, which also is another pathway for most to go to universal salvation. Very common. I've seen it happen a lot. I've watched people go through these transitions because they've told me. They've told, "Oh, Aaron, look what I discovered this." I say, "Well, that's very interesting. Okay, what else am I going to say?" There was one person recently who asked me about this. What did I think? And I told him what to look for. I said you need to watch out for universal salvation. That there is no hell. You have to watch out for that because that's usually where people go. And I don't know if he'll take that into consideration or not. That's his thing. That's his business. But these are some good examples of modern day campfire theology, even within the church today, that's not easily categorized into pagan Greek philosophy, but it follows along the exact same pathways, the same principles, the idea that God cannot do something. All right, I'm going to pause there. That's chapter 1, verse 19, "For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent." Don't consider this to be something that he really has to do a lot in order to accomplish. Okay, from what I can tell, he really doesn't have to do anything. Okay, for it to say that I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, he doesn't really have to do anything in order for that to be accomplished. All he has to do is just wait and let them destroy themselves. With regards to bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent, in this translation, to bring to nothing, he doesn't have to do anything to bring it to nothing. It already is nothing. Okay? And so, I want you to understand that he doesn't have to be a participant in people's lives in order to accomplish this. But on occasion, if he does this, I would suggest that it would be a very good thing for him to do, very kind, very merciful, so that people would achieve their destruction and nothingness sooner than later. Because if they do, well, they can be open to some different ideas. All right, I'm going to pause here. I'll continue into verse 20 in the next message. For those of you who are using this for small groups, I got a general question to facilitate some conversation. What do you know about Greek philosophy? Right? What do you know about Greek philosophy? Now, I can expect, because I've been in an abundance of small groups like this, I would not expect anyone to be able to give some kind of a description of what they know about Greek philosophy. Okay, I'm not expecting that. The question is to show that hardly anybody knows anything about it. And yet, from what I've just described, I want you to consider that actually you do. Okay, you do know a lot about Greek philosophy. You just don't realize that that's what it is. All right, I'm hoping that this will provoke some thought and consideration that maybe what you are believing is consistent with that. If you will just take some time and study it for yourself, I think you'll see it. All right, and I will continue in the next message. Thanks.